Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Yud Bet Mishnah Dalet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden Amen. The Mishnah begins Hakotev Shte Otiyot Be'elem Echad. If one writes two letters on Shabbat in a single lapse of awareness, so for example, he forgets it is Shabbat and writes two letters before he remembers, Hayav is liable for writing. Now this follows the general rule that in order to incur liability, a person must perform the entire melacha in one lapse of awareness. Now the Tosfot explains, although this rule was already taught in the previous chapter, chapter 11, Mishnah 6, it's repeated here in the context of the melacha of writing as an introduction to the machloket later on in Mishnah 6 regarding someone who wrote in two lapses of awareness. The Mishnah continues, Katav bidyo besam besikra bekomos uvkankantom uvchol davar shu roshem. If he wrote two letters with black ink, with orpiment, a yellow mineral, with vermilion, a red mineral, with gum arabic, the hardened sap of a type of tree, with ferrous sulfate, which is iron treated with sulfuric acid, or anything else that marks permanently al shnei chodei zaviyot, or if he wrote two letters on two walls that meet at a corner. So for example, he wrote one letter on the edge of one wall and a second letter near it on the edge of the next wall. Val shnei luchei pinkas, or on two pages of a ledger that face each other, which the Rav explains a ledger is a book in which a storekeeper records his accounts. Now when we say that they face each other, the Rav explains he wrote one letter on the inner edge of one page and a second letter near it on the inner edge of the facing page. Then negin zeim zeh, and the letters on the walls or tablets are close enough to be read together at one time. Hayav, in all of these cases, he is liable. The Mishnah continues, Hakotev al bisaro hayav, one who writes two letters with ink or any other substance that makes a permanent mark on his skin is liable, which the Mefarshim explain. Although letters written on skin will eventually disappear, this is not because the ink or the writing surface is deficient, but because the warmth of the body causes them to fade. Now this case may be compared to that of one who writes letters with ink on paper and then erases them, as the Rambam explains in Chot Shabbat chapter 11, Halacha 16. Now since the letters themselves are fit to last and are removed by an external factor, one is liable for writing them. The Mishnah continues, Hamsaret al bisaro. This is the law regarding one who scratches two letters into his skin with a sharp instrument. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatat. Rabbi Eliezer rules that he is liable to bring a chatat because he considers even this to be a normal way of writing. The Rabbi Yeshua poter, but the Rabbi Yeshua rules that he is exempt because in his view it's not a normal way of writing. And the Rab explains, according to Rabbi Yeshua, he is exempt even if he scratched so deeply that blood came out. And the Rav says, V'alachak Rabbi Yeshua, the Alachah follows Rabbi Yeshua, that he is exempt. That is in Rabotai of Mishnah Dal. Mishnah now lists instances of writing for which there is no biblical liability. Katav v'mashkin, if one wrote with liquids that make a temporary mark that is black, like mulberry juice, the Rav says, b'mei perot, or with fruit juices that make a temporary mark of some other color, ba'avak derachim, ba'avak esofrim, or if one drew letters in the dust of roads or in the powder of scribes, meaning the dry residue that forms at the bottom of inkwells, which the Rav explains. For example, he uses finger to indent letters in the dust or powder. Or if one wrote with anything else that does not last, patur, he is exempt because one is not liable for the melacha of writing unless the writing is permanent, though it is still asumid rabbanan, it is rabbinically prohibited. The Mishnah now lists cases of writing where the writer is exempt for other reasons. Le'achar yado, if one wrote with the back of his hand facing the writing surface, so for example, he put the pen upside down between his fingers and then turned his hand over and wrote, be'arglo, be'piv, uv'mapeko, or with the writing instrument held by his foot, his mouth, or his elbow, katabot ahat samuch lakitab, or he wrote one letter next to writing, meaning he wrote a letter next to one that had already been written, katav al gabe katab, or he wrote on top of writing, meaning he traced over two letters that had already been written in order to refresh them, nitkaven ichtov het v'chatav shtei zainin, or he intended to write the letter chet, but he left out the middle of the letter and therefore wrote two zayins instead, which the Tefillat Yisrael explains that in Assyrian script, which is a script used in Torah scrolls and other sacred texts, the letter chet is formed by joining two zayins at the top. In this case, he didn't add the top of the chet, leaving just two zayins. Echad ba'aretz v'echad b'korah, or he wrote one letter on the floor and one letter on a beam in the ceiling. Katav al shnei chodei habayit, or he wrote two letters on two walls of a house that are not next to each other. Or the Tefillat Yisrael says he wrote them on the same wall but far apart from each other. al shnei dapei pinkas, or on two columns of ledger that are next to each other, which the Rav explains. The two letters cannot be placed near each other unless the part of the page that separates them is cut off. V'negin zeim zeh, and in the last three situations, the letters cannot be read together because of the space between them. Patur, in all of these cases, he exempt from liability. Now, in the first group of cases, which is writing with the back of his hand facing the writing surface, or with the writing instrument held by his foot, mouth, or elbow, the person is exempt from liability because these are not normal ways of writing. Now, in the second case, where one who writes, in the second group, where one who writes one letter next to an existing letter is exempt, that's because he did not write two letters. Now, he is exempt even though he finished the melacha. Now, a person is not liable for doing a melacha once he performs all of it, like we saw in chapter 10, Mishnah 2, and chapter 13, and what we will see in chapter 13, Mishnah 1. Now, in the case of one who traces two existing letters, that again, he's exempt because he did not create new letters. In the case of one who writes two zayin letters instead of a chet, he is exempt because he did not intend to write two letters. And in the last group of cases where one letter on the floor and one on the ceiling, or letters on separate walls, or letters in two separate columns, the person is exempt because he did not write two letters that can be read together. The Mishnah concludes with a dispute. Katav otahat notarikon. If one wrote one letter with a mark next to it to indicate that it's an abbreviation for an entire word. So, for example, he wrote kuf as an abbreviation for the word korban, or mem as an abbreviation for maaser, or taf as an abbreviation for teruma. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Betera mechayev, chachamim potrin. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Betera rules that he is liable because as if he wrote the whole word. It's as if he wrote the whole word, because since everyone sees that letter as representing an entire word, writing it is an equivalent to writing all the letters of that word, according to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Betera. The chachamim potrin, but the sages ruled that he is exempt, since in reality he wrote only one letter. And the Rab says, "V'alacha kechachamim," the halacha follows the opinion of the sages. That is in Rabotai today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.